Our last presentation on substance abuse crimes deals with the war on drugs and the marijuana legalization movement. Richard Nixon declared the first American war on drugs in the 1970s, but it paled in comparison to Ronald Reagan's war on drugs a decade later in the 1980s. Reagan's war on drugs was more of an actual war. He actually sent troops into South America, and they were mainly focused on fighting the cocaine trade. His war was also more penal, less treatment-based and more focused on sending drug users and drug traffickers to prison. As a result of Reagan's war on drugs, the American incarceration rate increased dramatically. We are now the world's leader in the incarceration rate, and that's largely due to the 1980s war on drugs. Again, it was mainly a war on cocaine. Certainly there was concern about other drugs, but the primary focus was on the war on drugs. Probably didn't reduce drug use that much, if any. And again, it may have just caused more markets to grow as drug traffickers diversified into heroin, and heroin made a comeback in the 1990s with all the focus being on cocaine, and cocaine continued to spread throughout American cities. So the war on drugs, in most people's opinion, was pretty much a failure, other than producing a higher incarceration rate, if that's what its goal was, which was not its stated goal. Its stated goal was to end the scourge of drugs, which it certainly didn't do. More recently, we've seen a different trend from strict criminalization and harsh penalization towards legalization. So you can see in this map, which is relatively recent, that we've got a lot of green on this map where we didn't have even 10 years ago. So the light colored green states are the ones where under state law, and I'll emphasize that in the next slide, but under state law, recreational marijuana is legal. In the darker green states, medical marijuana use has been legalized. So that includes even Pennsylvania. Now, all of the Northeast, the West Coast, we just have some swaths in the middle of the country that have not been filled in green. But even in those states, there are movements to at least legalize medicinal marijuana use. Despite the state legalization of either recreational or medicinal marijuana use, marijuana remains a prohibited substance under federal law. Now, under the Obama administration decided to not prosecute individuals in those states where legalization of some kind had occurred. And so therefore, the Department of Justice under President Obama, took a hands-off approach to those states where either medicinal marijuana use was condoned or recreational marijuana use was permitted. However, in just the past few weeks, there have been indications from the Trump administration and Attorney General Jeff Sessions that the federal government will enforce the Controlled Substances Act. Remember, marijuana is still a Schedule I substance. Will enforce it even in those states where the states have legalized marijuana use. And you may ask, how can that be? Well, it's because the federal law is not in conflict with the state law. It may seem like they are, but they really aren't. There's no requirement that the state make everything criminal that the federal government has made criminal. Remember when we talked about prohibition, we said there were many states that did not criminalize the sale and distribution and manufacture of alcohol. They let that up to the federal government to enforce those laws. Well, a similar thing could happen if the Trump administration is serious about enforcing the federal laws, that those businesses in Colorado, California, and others that are dealing with recreational drug use, maybe even medicinal drug use in those other states, that those businesses could be raided and their owners could be arrested and the users could be arrested as well under federal law. So it's causing a lot of fear and trembling in those states because the states depend on the tax money that's been created as a result of these businesses, and people have ordered their lives around the expectation that these businesses are now legal. Well, they are not completely legal. They still violate federal law. So it's going to be interesting to watch what happens. Will the federal government enforce these laws? Even during the Obama administration, there were problems because under federal banking laws, any proceeds from drug businesses are illegal, and federal banks cannot accept that money. So there was a problem with, for instance, in Colorado, when you had legalization of recreational marijuana use, and you had dispensaries and other pot shops that opened and made profits. Where were they going to put their profits? They couldn't put them in the banks because the banks wouldn't accept them because the banks were afraid of violating federal banking laws dealing with drug trafficking and the proceeds from drug trafficking and money laundering. And so the solution was perhaps stuff it in a mattress, but you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in some cases. And so these were some of the gray areas that resulted from marijuana legalization under federal law. Again, we're going to see how this all plays out, whether the Trump administration really does tackle enforcing federal drug law in the states where legalization of some kind has occurred, or whether they'll take the hands-off approach that the Obama administration had taken and see if legalization spreads across the United States to other states as well, where we may reach a point where eventually the federal government could remove marijuana from the list of controlled substances, or at least downgrade it to a lower schedule.